Hello and welcome. I start with the assumption that the Fox-Trump Republican Party is dangerous. If you don't agree with that, please start at the beginning of my video series because this segment won't make any sense. This week, I plan to talk about a few things we can do to diminish the power that the Trump-Fox Republican Party holds on our government at all levels. Unless I say otherwise, all quotations are from this book by New York University professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Her book is called Strongman, Mussolini to the Present. Last week, in my video about Mitch McConnell's power grab, I quoted Stephen Levitsky, Harvard professor and author of this book. He said that the greatest danger to democracy is the government slipping into dysfunction, which will erode public confidence in democratic institutions. This is a danger because when public confidence erodes, people become vulnerable to the appeal of a strongman who promises to get things done. What Ben-Ghiat calls the strongman as a national government leader really took off after World War I. World War I pretty much decimated the old order, the aristocracy, the monarchies. After the war, there was an attempt for democracy to take hold, but in a few notable countries, like Italy and Germany, a strong man was able to undermine democracy and take control of the government. Here's a definition of autocracy. Executive power is asserted at the expense of the legislative and judicial branches of government. Strongmen share particular traits. Ben-Ghiat tells the stories of quite a few strongmen, including Mussolini, Hitler, Gaddafi, Pinochet, Mobutu, Erdogan, Putin, Trump, and others. Patterns emerge. For example, they all use their public office to enrich themselves. After living through the Trump presidency, what's striking is that no matter which of these strong men Ben-Ghiat is describing, she could also be describing aspects of Trump. For example, sons-in-law have a prominent role in strongman governance. Mussolini made his son-in-law foreign minister. She gives lots of other examples, including, of course, Jared Kushner. Another trait many of them share is that when they come to power, it's with a history of lawbreaking. Another trait they have in common: strong men, like gangsters, find ways to create immunity for themselves, allowing their underlings to go to prison for their crimes. As Ben-Ghiat put it, from Mussolini onward, making sure you have immunity while those who have done your dirty work go to jail has been an essential strongman skill. After Trump's strong-arming of the president of Ukraine, I'd like you to do us a favor, though, and the way Trump instigated the January 6th riot without explicitly saying what he wanted to happen, I was struck by this Mussolini incident. Make Gobetti life difficult, Mussolini told his prefects about a young liberal journalist, leading to multiple arrests and a savage beating in the street. A weakened Gobetti died in 1926, soon after he went into exile. See how Mussolini has deniability? He never actually said, hurt him physically. Here's another interesting similarity. Rallies were the fascist strongman's favorite form of political theater, and Mussolini and Hitler used them as sites of emotional training to create a violent, lordly, fearless, cruel youth ready to do what was necessary for the nation. Now, apparently, Trump is going to restart his rallies. He wants to help Republicans retake the House, which is a time-honored way people set themselves up as a strong presidential candidate. Now, to really understand how to keep another strong man out of the White House, I think it's helpful to understand how strong men come to power, how they stay in power, and how eventually they lose power. Ben-Ghiat explains all of this thoroughly. Not long ago, strongmen often came to power through military coups. More commonly, they come to power through elections or other democratic means, and then they find a way to stay in power. Here's the key. Strongmen come to power with the backing and support of conservatives who believe that the strongman can be used as a vehicle for their own agenda. German conservatives thought Hitler would be their tool. In the early 30s, a few powerful conservatives in Germany started courting Hitler. They were worried because the liberals were gaining in strength, and they wanted to beat back the liberals, and they thought Hitler would be helpful. One industrialist thought Hitler would serve as a transition to restoring the German monarchy. Hitler actually won only about 33% of the vote, which is an interesting number. I did a video called The Authoritarian Personality several weeks back, which I cite political psychologists who say that about a third of the population has a tendency to fall in line behind an authoritarian leader. Hitler actually became chancellor through a backroom deal with powerful conservatives. He became chancellor by degree instead of parliamentary majority. One industrialist who helped prop up Hitler later said, "I, too, misjudged the political situation at the time." Mussolini came to power when the king appointed him prime minister. The king thought he could control Mussolini. He couldn't. Pinochet was backed by his own military, which was conservative, but he was also propped up by Henry Kissinger and the power of the United States. From Ben-Ghiat, it works like this. Conservative elites strike an authoritarian bargain that promises them power and security in return for loyalty to the ruler and toleration of his suspension of rights. Some are true believers, and others fear the consequences of subtracting their support. But those who sign on tend to stick with the leader through gross mismanagement, impeachment, or international humiliation. That describes what we're seeing right now with the Republican Party, many of whom initially resisted Trump's bid for the Republican nomination in 2016, but now they fall in line. McConnell and other conservative and right-wing elites see Trump as a vehicle to accomplish their goals. Ben-Ghiat issued a warning. Many learned too late the rule about cooperating with authoritarian regimes. As with the related world of organized crime, the moment you agree to do one thing, the trap is set for you to do another. Another thing that is striking is the extent to which right-wing America influenced the rise of far right-wing European parties and dictators across the globe. From Ben-Ghiat, America has played an outsized role in the success of authoritarianism around the world, starting with the U.S. banks and media outlets that supported Mussolini's dictatorship in the 1920s. Pinochet relied on the misinformation turned out by the American-Chilean Council, which he partly funded. The council was headed by Marvin Liebman and William F. Buckley. The council's reports downplayed Pinochet's violence and emphasized its economic policies and stability. There you go, William Buckley, the guy who founded the very influential conservative magazine, The National Review. Ben-Ghiat also talks about how right-wing European parties took their cue from America's more radical form of conservatism that had taken hold during the 1980s, thanks to the support given to anti-big government and pro-white Christian sentiments during Ronald Reagan's presidency. Ben-Ghiat gives lots of other examples of American conservatives propping up these kinds of dictators worldwide. Like Kissinger, Trump advisor Roger Stone and Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort has a history of supporting strongmen that went back to the age of military coups. They supported Mobutu and lots of others. When RT America, Russia's propaganda network, wanted to expand its influence in the United States, it hired Fox News personalities. This is not a coincidence. Just as these strongmen come to power with the backing of conservatives, they tend to lose power when they lose the backing of these conservatives. Part of what helped drive Pinochet from power was that his violence against his own people and his obvious corruption started to worry his international backers, particularly his American backers. Here's the passage from Ben-Ghiat. Elliott Abrams, who had served as President Reagan's Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America, recalled the moment bluntly. Pinochet had outlived any usefulness he had ever had. Even if you thought he was terrific in 1973, by 1983, it was time for him to go. So, American conservatives loved Pinochet in 1973? My husband's from Chile. He and his family experienced the Pinochet dictatorship. In 1973, Pinochet had the legitimate president who had won a national election murdered. Pinochet bombed the palace right in the middle of the city. So for the record, Pinochet wasn't terrific in 1973. Here's what else Ben-Ghiat says. More personalist rulers, strongmen, are toppled by elites than by popular revolutions. While they may last longer than other kinds of authoritarians, 80% of them are booted out of office eventually. Had the entire Republican Party lined up behind Trump's attempt to overthrow the election, we would have been in a much more harrowing situation. But key conservatives like Pence and Georgia's Secretary of State Raffensperger and others refused to go along. Conservative judges, even some appointed by Trump, tossed out Trump's frivolous lawsuits. I'll add that Daniel Ziblatt, a Harvard political science professor and the other co-author of this book, agrees. This is a headline from a Washington Post interview with Ziblatt. Why liberal democracy only dies when conservatives help. Okay, so what can we do? Pressure campaigns work. Pressure campaigns on banks, law firms, and other enablers of authoritarian corruption can fuel a reconsideration of the practice of working for autocrats for the revenue it brings. So what we can do, and should do, is boycott the companies that are propping up the Trump party. Big corporations like the tax cuts they get from the Trump party, but if their sales drop off and people stop using their services, what good are tax cuts? We need to show these corporations that it's in their financial interest to support democracy, not autocracy. I started by quoting Levitsky, who says that the greatest danger to democracy is the government slipping into dysfunction because this makes people vulnerable to the appeal of a strong man who promises to get things done. What Biden needs to do, and what he's doing, is make government work. And that includes strengthening institutions like the DOJ so that we can withstand another Trump. Basically, we have 4 years to build back up what Trump battered. The judges that Biden will appoint over the next 4 years will go a long way to strengthening the judicial branch. Criminal prosecutions can certainly help, but it's not like these guys are going to say, Trump was prosecuted, so we should just fold up shop and learn to play nice. Remember, most of these strongmen come to power with criminal backgrounds. People who like strongmen like the fact that they break laws. We've seen how the Republican Party will shield and defend Trump no matter what he does. Of course, it's hard to run for office from jail, but that won't deter another Trump-like figure from stepping forward. And in fact, right now, we're seeing lots of elected Republican leaders trying to position themselves as the next Trump. Also, from Ben-Ghiat, prosecution plays into the victimhood cult. Besides, facts don't bother them. They'll just say that the prosecutors and juries were biased against them. The Republican demographics are shrinking, particularly as the party more openly embraces white supremacy. And we still have functioning elections, so obviously people turning out in large numbers to vote is crucial. I should flash up here once more the cover of the book I've been quoting, Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present, by New York University professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be back next week with another of these videos.